So a few weeks, I was on the BBC World Service talking about the work we do across Africa.
What sort of stories have you been hearing?
Oh, all kinds of stories. I mean, of course, there have been very difficult stories of family rejection, stories of violence, but there's also many stories of resilience, people creating families.
I did the interview and went into the office, and then the BBC put a link to the article on Facebook.
The headline says, working to make sure that Africa's LGBTQ community is remembered, Selly records people's stories.
And then, of course, the comments start to roll in.
Stop promoting rubbish. We don't want any white man's curse in Africa.
Africans are not gays or lesbians.
There you go again, invading Africa with Western rubbish.
We've got our own culture. They should accept that.
We reject it completely.
Eish! We condemn and reject. This is white people's baseless culture, not Africans.
This is something we hear at AfroQueer over and over again. That homosexuality is un-African, that there were no gay people before Europeans came. And what's really frustrating is
this just isn't true. We interviewed a ton of experts, and they told us that before colonialism, there's proof of fluid gender identity and sexuality amongst the Langi in Uganda, the Kisi in Kenya, the Igbo in Nigeria, the Nuer in South Sudan, the Tutsi in Rwanda, the Kuria of Tanzania, and archives of things like this. Ancient Egyptian artwork from about 2350 BC.
So the sentiments expressed by our Facebook commenters haven't always been the dominant attitude. Today, homosexuality is criminalized in 32 of the 54 countries on the African continent, including Kenya, where we make our show.
On May 24th, 2019, the High Court was set to rule on repealing Section 162A and C of the Kenyan Penal Code, which says,
any person who has carnal knowledge or permits a male person to have carnal knowledge of him or her against the order of nature is guilty of a felony.
Basically, when they say carnal knowledge, they mean sex. And against the order of nature means literally any sex that isn't penis and vagina procreative sex.
The Kenyan court also ruled on repealing Section 165.
Any male person, whether in public or private, commits an act of gross indecency with another male person or procures another male person to commit any act of gross indecency with him or attempts to procure the commission of any such act by any male person with himself or another male person, whether in public or private, is guilty of a felony.
Yeah. So this clause is important because it means that not only can you be arrested for having sex with someone of the same sex, but also for simply trying to. So hitting on somebody is a felony, enough to land you in prison.
These laws have been part of the Kenyan Penal Code since 1897, when Kenya was still under the rule of the British Empire.
And to understand why, we're gonna have to start in the cold-ass north, England. Prior to 1533 in England, the Catholic Church was responsible for meting out punishment for something they called acts of buggery.
Acts of buggery were defined as anal sex, whether with a man or woman, as well as bestiality.
Now, in 1533, King Henry VIII was at war with the Catholic Church. He wanted to get divorced from his first wife, Catherine, and marry his already pregnant girlfriend, Anne Boleyn. But the Catholic Church would not allow the divorce.
So Henry decided he would break from the Catholic Church, make England Protestant, get his divorce, and marry Anne.
He then passed the Buggery Act, which was the first time that the Parliament of England took on the responsibility of punishing people who they believed had committed this offense against God and man. And this crime was punishable by death.
According to scholars of the law, Henry was less interested in legislating against homosexuality or people committing buggery, but was using the law as a political tool to crush enemies who supported the Catholic Church. Remember, he's trying to get his divorce.
So if you're on the wrong side of Henry, you'd have to confess to buggery, having anal sex or sex with an animal. The government would be able to seize all of your property and wealth, and then you could be executed.
It wasn't just a law.
It was a weapon.
Later that century, towards the end of the 1500s, England started empire building,
By brutally enslaving and subjugating people,
planting flags,
forcing people to speak English,
taking land that wasn't theirs,
extracting resources, and generally making themselves
very,
very
very.
wealthy.
But what they also did was bring their laws.
Britain's empire-building project came hand in hand with puritanical and Victorian social morals. While sending their soldiers away from their families to travel the world and conquer, Britain was also anxious about what their men would get up to in these faraway, exoticized lands.
So Britain introduced strict codes regulating sexual behavior that they called penal codes. A penal code is a list of criminal offenses and their punishments.
So initially, these penal codes weren't even about regulating the sexualities of the people the British were colonizing. Britain was worried about their own soldiers and colonists who might turn to each other for comfort on those long journeys.
So when the British wrote the Indian Penal Code, they included a clause to criminalize homosexuality, and it was included in all colonial penal codes thereafter, including Kenya and many other African countries.
The garden party at Government House was an informal farewell to British rule in Kenya. Jomo Kenyatta.
Kenya won independence from Britain in 1963. No longer under British rule, Kenya drafted its own constitution and became a republic.
But what stayed the same? The penal codes that criminalized homosexuality.
So in its recommendations, the human rights body wants the government to stop the violence meted on lesbians, gays, bisexual, transgender, and sexual workers.
Since then, these laws have had an enormous impact on the lives of lesbian, gay, bisexual, gender nonconforming, transgender, and intersex Kenyans, as well as their loved ones. People have been evicted from their homes, lost their jobs, had their children taken away, been blackmailed, and harassed by police.
In 2010, Kenya adopted a new constitution. Civil society groups and queer activists hoped that this more liberal constitution would lead to a lasting change because of this clause.
The state shall not discriminate directly or indirectly against any person on any ground, including race, sex, pregnancy, marital status, health status, ethnic or social origin, color, age, disability, religion, conscience, belief, culture, dress, language, or birth.
That clause created an opportunity for LGBT activists to take the Kenyan government to court and challenge the penal code. The argument being that this penal code was now unconstitutional as it discriminated directly against LGBT people. So in 2016, a coalition of LGBT organizations filed petitions to challenge the penal code.
The same penal code that had been passed down from King Henry VIII in the 1530s,
the British colonization of India in the 19th century,
Kenyan independence in the 1960s,
and Kenyan constitutional reform in 2010.
This law has haunted and harassed the Commonwealth for centuries.
And on May 24th, 2019, activists, allies, and journalists piled into the court. And then the judges read out the ruling. The High Court of Kenya issued its ruling deciding to uphold this law. We lost.
While disappointed, activists on the ground in Kenya know that this is just one hurdle in the long journey to equality.
An appeal is going to be filed, so this is by no means over.
This season on AfroQueer, we're telling stories just like this one. Stories that delve deep into the truths of queer African lives and histories.
Stories not only from Kenya, but from Somalia, Zimbabwe, Uganda, Guinea, Nigeria, and the diaspora.
Stories of people who are facing tough challenges with incredible resilience. Stories of overcoming diversity, adversity, but also of complexity and joy.
To listen to the stories of queer Africans living and loving, surviving and thriving,
subscribe to the AfroQueer podcast on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Pocket Casts, and pretty much anywhere podcasts are available.
Follow us on social media or get in touch at www.afroqueerpodcast.com.